My name is Eleanor Parker. I'm 68 years old, a widow and a mother, and I still can't forget the moment my son looked me in the eye and left me standing in the middle of Dallas or Fort Worth Airport with nothing but my purse clutched to my chest. It happened so fast, I almost didn't believe it. 1 second, we were walking toward the security checkpoint together, Jason carrying his sleek carry-on bag, and Amber gliding beside him with her designer luggage and her practiced little smile. Then she turned her heels clicking against the polished floor and said the words that still burn in my ears. "We only bought you a one-way ticket. You'll figure it out." I froze. I thought maybe I'd heard her wrong. Maybe she was joking. But the way Jason glanced at her, then back at me, and didn't say a word, told me everything. He just adjusted his sunglasses like he couldn't quite bear to meet my eyes and kept walking toward the line as though I were just another stranger he didn't owe anything to. People around us started noticing. A few glanced up their eyes, darting between us, before quickly looking away as though embarrassed for me. I could feel the sting of their pity, and it wrapped around me tighter than my thin cardigan. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought everyone could hear it. Amber's smile lingered faint and sharp, like she was doing me a favor by saying something unpleasant nobody else would. She tipped her head toward my purse and said I had a phone, didn't I? And that I could sell it if I needed bus money. Then she turned back to Jason and slipped her arm through his like we were done here. I just stood there. My mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. My son didn't even glance over his shoulder as the two of them disappeared into the line, swallowed up by the noise of boarding calls and rolling suitcases and laughter that wasn't mine. I kept telling myself to breathe, just breathe. But it felt like my lungs had forgotten how. My hands were shaking, and I realized too late that I'd dropped the little printed itinerary I'd been holding, the one I'd trusted, like it was proof I still mattered to them. One woman passing by offered me a polite smile that faded into awkward pity as soon as she noticed I had no luggage at my feet. I tried to straighten my back, tried to look like I belonged there, and not like someone who had just been discarded. But inside, something heavy sank down into my chest and stayed there. I wanted to run after them, to grab Jason's arm, and demand he tell me this wasn't what it looked like. But my feet didn't move. My voice didn't work. I stood rooted to that spot while they moved farther and farther away until the sight of them blurred with everyone else's. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They had planned this. They had invited me on this trip, taken my help with the tickets, let me believe I was still a part of them, just so they could leave me behind without a second thought. I could feel the eyes of strangers lingering on me. A few whispered. Someone chuckled as if my humiliation was just another little scene to watch while they waited for their own flights. And all I could do was clutch my purse closer and hope it hid the way my hands trembled. I didn't cry. Not yet. My pride wouldn't let me, but I felt the first crack in me that would never quite go away. It's a strange thing realizing your own child can look you dead in the eye and decide you are no longer worth the trouble. It's even stranger to feel the world keep moving around you like nothing happened. In that moment, I stopped being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone who belonged somewhere. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely alone. When I stood in that airport watching my son walk away, all I could think about was everything I had given up for him. Tom and I weren't rich, not even close, but we worked hard and we made it work. He drove a delivery truck and I worked nights at the diner so we could keep a roof over our heads and give Jason things we never had growing up. We didn't take vacations. We didn't buy new cars. We patched things up and made them last because our money always went to him. There were nights Tom came home bone-tired and still found the energy to help Jason with his math homework while I stood in the kitchen packing his lunch for the next day. We always said education was the one thing no one could take from you, so we did whatever it took to send him to college. I remember sitting at the table with Tom, looking at tuition bills, deciding what we could sell, what we could go without. Tom skipped retirement contributions for years just to make the next semester payment. Even after Jason graduated and got married, Tom and I stayed close to him. He never called as much as I wished he would, but I figured that was just how it went. Young people got busy. They had their own lives. At least that's what I told myself when he only came by on holidays. Then Tom got sick. At first we thought it was just a cough, but it didn't go away. By the time the doctor said lung cancer, it was already too late to fight it. He was gone in just 3 months. I still hear his voice some mornings when I wake up half expecting to find him humming off key in the kitchen like he always did. The quiet in the house after he died was suffocating. There were days I didn't even bother to open the curtains. So when Jason and Amber called and said they wanted to take me on a trip to help me heal, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Amber said getting away would be good for me, that they were all pitching in, that it was a family thing. For the first time since Tom passed, I thought maybe they still cared. Maybe they still wanted me around. Jason even said Tom would have wanted me to get out of the house and see the world. I clung to that thought like a lifeline. The week before we left, I opened the jewelry box Tom had given me on our 15th anniversary. In the corner, wrapped in tissue, were the gold earrings he'd saved up to buy me. They weren't fancy, but they were real gold, and I'd worn them on every anniversary dinner since. I held them in my hand for a long time that night, remembering how proud he'd looked when he gave them to me. Then I wrapped them back up and took them to the pawn shop the next morning. The man behind the counter looked at me funny when I told him I was sure. I used the money to give to Jason and Amber, thinking it would help cover my part of the flights. I didn't even ask for a receipt. I trusted them when they said it was a group effort. I packed my bag with care. I even brought along a framed picture of Tom so I could feel like he was with me. I thought this trip would be the start of something better, a way back to my family, a way to feel like I still belonged. But standing there in the airport, watching them disappear, I realized that hope had been a mistake. All those years of sacrifice, all those little pieces of myself I'd given up for Jason, and this was what he thought of me now. It still stings to remember how excited I'd been just days earlier. How proud I'd felt to pitch in, to still be useful to them, to still be part of something. And it still breaks my heart to know that they never saw me as anything more than someone to use and leave behind. I think about Tom and wonder what he would have said if he'd seen me that night in the pawn shop slipping those earrings into the man's hands. I hope he would have understood. I hope he wouldn't have been too disappointed in me for believing in Jason the way I did. Because when you're a mother, you don't stop believing. You don't stop giving, even when it hurts, even when they don't deserve it. And that's exactly what they counted on. Looking back, I can see now that the little things had started long before the airport. They were so subtle at first, I almost convinced myself I imagined them. A look from Jason when I offered my opinion, a sigh from Amber when I asked a question she didn't think worth answering. I used to bring up ideas when we'd sit around the table for holidays, ways we could spend more time together. Little things I thought they'd appreciate. Every time, Jason would nod without looking up from his phone, and Amber would smile that tight little smile and change the subject. They never outright said no, but somehow I always ended up feeling foolish for even speaking. Sometimes I would notice how they talked about me like I wasn't even there. Amber telling Jason that I didn't understand how things worked anymore, that it was too much to expect me to keep up. Jason never corrected her. He'd just let her say it like it was the plain truth, and I was too fragile or too dumb to argue. When I retired from the diner, I thought they'd be happy for me. I'd worked so hard all those years, but the day I told them over dinner, Amber just raised an eyebrow and asked what I planned to do now, seeing as how people like me didn't do very well with too much time on their hands. Jason chuckled like she was just being funny, and I laughed along because I didn't know what else to do. Even on the drive to the airport that morning, I felt the weight of how little they thought of me. Amber kept fiddling with her nails while Jason talked about the resort. I tried to ask about the return flight, whether it would be late at night or the next morning, so I could plan. Amber didn't even glance at me when she said I didn't have anything better to do anyway, so what difference did it make? That one stung more than I let on. It wasn't just her words, but the way she smirked, like I should be grateful they were even letting me come along. Jason stayed quiet, eyes on the road, gripping the wheel tighter than usual. I sat back and stared out the window, swallowing hard, telling myself not to cry. It wasn't just that one moment, though. It was all the little ways they made me feel like I didn't belong anymore, like I was something to be tolerated instead of someone to be loved. I stopped offering to help with the kids because Amber always said she had it handled. I stopped bringing pies to family dinners because no one ever touched them. Over time, I started to feel like a guest in my own family, waiting for permission to speak, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Every now and then, Jason would throw me a crumb of kindness, and it was enough to keep me hoping things would get better. But deep down, I think I already knew. That ride to the airport was quiet after Amber's remark. I kept my hands folded in my lap and stared straight ahead. When we got out of the car, she shot me a look like she'd already won some argument I didn't even know we were having. And all I could do was follow behind them, feeling smaller with every step. By the time we reached the ticket counter, that feeling of smallness had become so familiar, I didn't even question it anymore. That was their power, to make me believe I deserved to feel that way. And I hate to admit it, but for a long time, I believed them. I remember standing at the check-in counter, clutching my little folder of travel papers like it was a life vest. I handed them to the young woman behind the desk and smiled, even though my palms were damp and my heart was thudding in my chest. She scanned them quickly, then frowned and tapped at her keyboard, her eyes flicking to me with that look people get when they don't want to be the bearer of bad news. She cleared her throat and told me there was no return ticket under my name. I blinked at her, sure she had made a mistake. I explained that I was traveling with my son and his wife, that it must be listed with theirs, and she nodded and checked again. Her frown deepened as she told me the Monroe reservation was for 2 passengers only, no third ticket, no luggage checked under Eleanor Parker. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I couldn't speak. It felt like the air in the room had turned heavy and hot. I tried to smile at her, tried to tell her she must be mistaken, but her eyes were already sliding past me to the next passenger in line. I turned, gripping my purse like it was all I had left, and that's when I saw them. Jason and Amber, already walking toward the security line without me. I called out his name softly at first, then louder when he didn't turn around. He finally glanced back just once, and I swear I saw a flash of guilt before he looked away. Amber didn't bother to pretend. She slowed just enough to toss her words over her shoulder, saying, "I had a phone, didn't I? And if I needed bus money, I could always sell it." Her voice was light, almost playful, like she thought she was being clever. Then she slipped her arm through Jason's and kept walking, her heels clicking against the tile. I stood there, frozen, my stomach twisting into knots, my cheeks burning as people started to notice. A man behind me coughed and looked away. A woman near the kiosk gave me a pitying smile and then quickly busied herself with her luggage. I felt stripped bare in front of all of them, like every stranger in that airport could see exactly what had just happened. For a second, I thought my knees might give out. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run after Jason and grab his sleeve and beg him to tell me this wasn't real. But I didn't. Something inside me refused to let them see me break. I forced myself to straighten my back and take a step away from the counter. I walked slowly to a nearby bench and sat down, my chin high, even though my hands were trembling in my lap. My eyes stung, but I blinked hard, determined not to cry in front of all those people. I watched as they moved farther and farther down the line, Jason never turning back. Amber leaned her head on his shoulder, her laugh floating back to me like a cruel little song. In that moment, I felt something cold settle deep in my chest. That was when it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't carelessness. They had planned this. They had brought me all this way just to leave me here. I thought of the gold earrings I had sold to help pay for this trip, of the nights I had stayed awake, feeling hopeful I was still part of something. And now here I was, nothing but an inconvenience they could finally shrug off. The hurt cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. But under that hurt was something else. A quiet kind of pride that told me not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I sat there, watching them disappear into the crowd, until I couldn't see them anymore. And when they were finally gone, I exhaled slowly and told myself I wouldn't shed a single tear until I was alone. Because no matter how small they tried to make me feel, I still had myself. And I would not let them take that too. I sat on that airport bench for a long time after they were gone, letting the noise of rolling suitcases and boarding calls wash over me. My hands finally stopped shaking. My heart didn't, but I could feel something inside me shift like a door closing quietly. I knew I couldn't go home the same woman who'd left it that morning. When I stood up, I didn't rush. I walked out of the terminal with my purse on my arm and hailed a cab as if nothing had happened. The driver didn't ask questions. He just nodded when I gave him the address to David Lyman's law office. David had been our lawyer for years, ever since Tom and I bought our first house. He handled our wills, our mortgage, even a little land dispute once. I remembered how Tom always trusted him, how he used to say David was one of the good ones. When I walked into the office, David looked surprised to see me. His hair was thinner now. His glasses perched lower on his nose, but his handshake was still strong. He started to say how sorry he was about Tom, but I stopped him with a polite smile. I wasn't there to talk about the past. I was there to talk about what came next. I sat down across from him and told him I wanted to update my will. His pen stilled for a moment before he asked if I was sure. I told him I was. Every word. We went through it line by line. The house, the land, the savings Tom and I had scraped together over 40 years. It was all supposed to go to Jason. Every penny of it written in his name as if it were his birthright. I told David to strike it all. Remove Jason. Remove Amber. Leave nothing to either of them. He didn't flinch. He just nodded and started crossing through their names. I pulled a brochure from my purse and slid it across the desk. It was for Silver Haven, a nonprofit that helps elderly people who've been abandoned or mistreated by their families. Housing, legal support, companionship. Everything I wished someone had offered me. I told him I wanted to leave everything to them. Every dollar, every acre. He raised his eyes at that, but he didn't question me. He just wrote it down and kept moving through the pages. There was a kind of freedom in it. Sitting there watching him erase my son's name from my future, I felt lighter than I had in years. For once, I wasn't thinking about what anyone else wanted. I wasn't worried about keeping the peace or sparing feelings. I was thinking about me. David asked if I wanted to leave Jason and Amber a letter of explanation. I shook my head. They didn't deserve an explanation. If they didn't know what they'd done to lose me, no letter in the world would make them understand. By the time I stood up to leave, the paperwork was signed and sealed. My hands were steady. My back was straight. I thanked David, and as he walked me to the door, he said quietly that Tom would have been proud of me. I didn't say anything to that, but I let myself believe it. Outside, the sun was starting to set, casting a warm gold across the buildings. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was my own again. I didn't call Jason. I didn't call Amber. I didn't tell them what I'd done. That was the sweetest part of it. Knowing that while they went about their lives thinking they'd gotten away with it, I was quietly rewriting the ending they thought they'd already written for me. They thought I'd beg. They thought I'd cry. They thought I'd be grateful for whatever scraps of kindness they decided to throw my way. But they were wrong. I walked back to the street, hailed another cab, and gave the driver the address of a little motel across town. I didn't need much, just a place to rest my head for the night. Tomorrow, I'd figure out the rest. Because tonight, I had already won. And they didn't even know it yet. 6 months later, the calls started. The first one came in the morning, my phone buzzing across the table while I sipped my tea at Silver Haven. Jason's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I simply watched it ring, the sound sharp against the quiet of my new home. I let it go to voicemail. Then came another, and another, his name appearing again and again until it almost made me laugh. After everything, now he wanted to talk. By midday, my inbox was full of messages. Some short and rushed, others longer, trying to sound reasonable, pleading even. He said he didn't understand why I was doing this. Said it wasn't fair. Said Amber had just been trying to help and maybe things had come out wrong that day. He said they didn't mean to hurt me. He said I was overreacting. Then when none of that worked, he asked if I would at least let them keep the garden behind the house. The kids, he said, loved playing there. The garden meant something to them. That one almost made me smile. He hadn't asked about me. He hadn't said he missed me. He just wanted the garden. I didn't answer any of the calls or emails. I didn't owe him that. Instead, I set my phone face down on the table and looked out the window at the courtyard below. That week, the first of the construction crews arrived on what used to be my land. I stood at the edge of the field and watched as they measured plots and marked out beds, the new sign already up at the gate. Silver Haven Therapeutic Garden. It read in crisp green letters. The old oak tree still stood at the center, its branches wide and welcoming. Around it, volunteers were planting rows of lavender and wildflowers, laying stones for walking paths and raised beds where residents could grow herbs and vegetables. The director of Silver Haven caught my eye as I stood there and gave me a warm smile. She thanked me again for making it possible, but I just nodded. I didn't need thanks. Watching it come to life was enough. Every day after that, I took my coffee outside to see the progress. Little by little, the space filled with color and life. Elderly women leaned on canes and walkers as they helped place seedlings into the earth. One man hummed softly while trimming the edges of a new path. There was laughter, soft and genuine, drifting through the air like something I hadn't heard in years. The garden belonged to people who would truly care for it now. People who would find peace in it, not just post pictures of it online for show. Some nights, when I turned my phone back over, there were more messages waiting. Jason's words became sharper, his frustration slipping through. He said he didn't deserve this. He said family was supposed to forgive. He said I was being cruel. But I didn't feel cruel. I felt calm. For once, I was not the one scrambling to make things right. I wasn't the one begging for scraps of kindness. I simply let him feel what I had felt that day in the airport. I knew he would never say it, but I think somewhere deep down, he finally understood. He finally realized that silence was my answer. The day the garden officially opened, I stood at the gate in a soft spring breeze, watching as a little girl in pigtails helped an elderly woman water a row of pink roses. The director came over and handed me a pair of shears to cut the ribbon. The applause that followed was quiet but warm, the kind of sound that fills a hollow space you didn't even know was still there. That night, my phone buzzed once more. Another email from Jason. He said just 5 minutes. He said one call. He said please. I powered the phone off without reading the rest. Then I poured myself another cup of tea and watched the moonlight spill over the garden below, content to let the silence answer for me. Life at Silver Haven felt like something I never knew I needed. From the first morning, I woke up in my little corner room with sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of fresh coffee drifting up from the common room. I felt lighter somehow. It was quiet, but never lonely, and that was a kind of peace I had forgotten existed. The other residents welcomed me without question. On my first afternoon, a woman named Helen invited me to sit with her book circle, and I ended up staying for 2 hours laughing over chapters we never even got around to discussing. There was a retired school teacher named Ruth who insisted I join her watercolor class, and every Thursday I found myself standing by her side at the long tables, paintbrush in hand, and smiling like a little girl. We had dinners together every evening, and it became my favorite time of day. There was always a seat waiting, always someone asking how my day had gone, always someone who remembered I liked peppermint tea over chamomile. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an afterthought. I felt like I belonged. I started volunteering in the garden I had helped create, planting rows of herbs and helping other women who weren't steady on their feet anymore. There was something healing about working the soil with my hands, feeling it crumble between my fingers, watching new life take root. I couldn't help but think how fitting it was that something meant to leave me behind had grown into something so beautiful instead. One quiet evening, I was sitting on a bench by the roses when Helen walked over and settled beside me. She didn't say anything for a moment, just watched the sunset with me, then finally asked if I regretted it. I looked at her and said the truth before I even thought about it. I only regretted not doing it sooner. She nodded like she already knew that would be my answer. We sat there for a while longer, letting the cool evening air settle around us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at home. The family I chose wasn't bound by blood or obligation. It was made of people who looked me in the eye and saw me. People who saved me a seat, who called me by my name, who asked for nothing but my company in return. I learned that family doesn't have to hurt to count. Sometimes it's the ones you find along the way who remind you of your worth. And here at last, I had found mine. I've come to believe that dignity and love are never things you can demand. They are given freely by those who truly see you, and if someone refuses to see your worth, you have every right to walk away. I spent too many years believing that being quiet and giving was the same as being valued. What I learned is that even the quietest person can choose her own path. You don't have to stay where you're not respected. You don't have to keep giving pieces of yourself to people who only take. If you're lucky enough to still have a parent in your life, I hope you think about how you speak to them. Every word matters. Every small kindness matters even more. For me, my legacy isn't about what I left to Jason or Amber. It's about what I chose to build instead. A place where people feel welcome, where no one is left behind, where quiet voices are finally heard. I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to choose yourself, even when it hurts, even when others don't understand. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be treated with care. Some legacies are not given, they are chosen. And this one is mine.